She wasn't supposed to stop, not in that forest, not when she was late, not when the rules said, never approach a trapped wild horse. But Harper Quinn heard something that rules couldn't explain, a sound like crying, a Mustang, bleeding, trembling, and weeping. Everyone said wild horses can't feel that deeply, but they didn't see his eyes, they didn't see her drop her camera and step toward death just to give him a chance at life. What happened next rewrote everything we thought we knew about trust. Before we begin, tell us where you are watching from. And if this story touches your heart, please subscribe for more. The air was thin and sharp in the outskirts of Missoula, Montana that morning, one of those cold autumn dawns that painted the pine needles with frost and laced the air with the earthy perfume of damp leaves and smoke dust wind. The forest that wrapped the edge of Bitterroot National Forest lay in its quiet breath, shrouded in morning fog and painted with hues of copper and ash. Harper Quinn walked its edge like a phantom, silent, focused, and far from the life she once knew. Harper was 30, tall and slender, with a body honed from years of hiking through the backcountry. Her hair, a thick, messy braid the color of wet chestnuts, hung over the padded collar of her forest green utility jacket. Her eyes, wide and gray-blue like the Bitterroot River under a storm, were always in motion, scanning, framing, reading the world like a scene yet to be captured. Her skin had the worn, kissed-by-weather hue of someone who belonged more to open skies than rooftops. Harper didn't smile much, not anymore, not since the fall that took her sister. Ava had been younger by 2 years and braver by 10, the kind of soul who chased cliff edges and laughed at gravity. She'd slipped from a rock face in Glacier National Park while Harper waited with the camera ready. After the funeral, Harper stopped photographing people altogether. Animals didn't ask questions. Animals didn't blame. Animals just were. This morning, she was here to document a moose herd rumored to be moving through the lower elevation trails before winter thickened the forest. Her Nikon hung around her neck, her boots damp from the dew-slicked moss, and a half-eaten granola bar poked from her pocket. She moved with purpose until the sound stopped her in her tracks. It wasn't a bird, not a coyote either. It wasn't anything Harper had heard before in these woods. It was raw, ragged, and, God help her, it sounded like crying. She froze, the camera pressed reflexively to her chest, and listened. The sound came again, not constant, but repeated in breathless intervals, sharp snorts, a low whinny, followed by an eerie, choked stillness. Heart ticking faster now, Harper cut across the ridge toward the sound, ducking under low-hanging branches and maneuvering past slick rock. The forest closed around her, denser, darker, the ferns curling at her knees like whispering fingers. A fallen pine created a natural barrier, and as she stepped over it, she saw him. A Mustang, no doubt about it, stood trembling no more than 30 feet away. His coat was a pale slate gray, matted with dirt and bits of bark, and his mane tangled like storm clouds. One front leg was twisted awkwardly back, trapped in a rusted steel jaw buried into the ground. He was tall for a Mustang, lean but muscular, with a proud arch to his neck and a wild, untamed sharpness in the whites of his eyes. And then she saw the tears. Real tears. Not from irritation or dust, but thick, slow drops trailing down his long muzzle, glinting like dew in the filtered light. Harper knew what this meant. She had studied equine behavior in college before turning full-time photographer. Horses could produce tears for biological reasons, but this was something else. This was pain, fear, despair. She should leave. Wild horses were dangerous when injured. One kick from those hooves could crush her ribs like paper. The proper procedure was to mark the location, hike out, and call the Bureau of Land Management. But that would take hours, maybe longer. The Mustang would not last that long. She took a slow breath and unhooked her camera, placing it gently on a flat rock beside her. She kept her movements deliberate. Every inch forward was a silent conversation. "It's okay, big guy," she murmured, her voice a hush among the trees. "I see you." The horse's ears flicked at the sound. He didn't rear, he didn't bolt. He simply stood, shaking, foam around his mouth, as if the pain was no longer the worst part, only the waiting. 10 feet. Harper crouched and pulled off her jacket, knowing what she had to do. She'd use it to blindfold him, calm him. She reached for her field kit, small, but always packed with essentials. Antiseptic spray, a few bandages, a knife, protein bar, a half-full canteen. Closer now, 6 feet. She extended her hand, palm down, letting the Mustang catch her scent. The horse flinched and she froze. A long breath passed. Then, miraculously, he leaned forward and touched her fingertips with his muzzle. It felt like being seen for the first time in years. Harper pressed the jacket gently over his eyes and crouched beside the leg. The trap was brutal, illegal, rusted, and embedded in the soft flesh just above the fetlock. Blood matted the fur. The jaw's serrated edges bit deep. "Okay," she whispered. "This is going to hurt." With one foot braced against a nearby root, she grasped the lever with both hands and pulled. It didn't budge. Her arms screamed. The horse flinched but didn't kick. He remained, still, trusting. Another pull. A groan from the metal. A click. Then, like an exhale, the jaws released. The Mustang staggered back, dragging his leg free. Harper stayed low, arms wide in case he bolted. But he didn't. He just stood, eyes covered, breathing hard. She lifted the jacket. He looked at her. "I'm not gonna hurt you," she murmured. "I swear." She washed the wound with clean water. The horse twitched, but didn't pull away. She sprayed the antiseptic, speaking softly the whole time, nonsense words, calming tones. When she stepped back, expecting him to vanish into the trees, he didn't. He limped once in a circle, then stopped and looked back at her. Eyes still wet. Not with tears now, but something else. Recognition. Then he disappeared into the forest like smoke on the wind. The morning fog had begun to lift by the time Harper Quinn stood alone in the forest clearing, jacket slung over her shoulder, her breath steadying itself in the cool Montana air. The Mustang, no name yet, just gray fire and torn flesh, had vanished into the thicket, his limping silhouette absorbed by the trembling trees. The silence that followed his departure was profound, as if even the forest paused to mark what had happened. Harper knelt down beside the trap, its rusted metal teeth now blood-stained and bent, the earth around it scuffed and muddied by the Mustang's struggle. She took out her Nikon and photographed the device from several angles, adjusting her ISO settings automatically, not thinking. It was muscle memory. But the shot didn't matter this time. It was for evidence. She would report it later. Right now, she was more concerned about something she hadn't felt in years. Emotional aftermath. The last time she'd touched something this raw, it had been Ava's coat, found snagged on a branch below the cliff. The feeling now echoed that moment. Something between guilt and awe, helplessness and sacred duty. But she wasn't alone for long. A soft, crunching footfall behind her snapped Harper's instincts into overdrive. She turned quickly, fingers grazing the knife strapped to her hip, only to find herself facing a man. Older, bearded, wearing a tan field vest and a skeptical look. "Ma'am," he said, hands raised in peace. "I'm not here to spook you. Name's Hank Leary. I run the Firewatch station on the East Ridge. Saw your Jeep parked at the southern trailhead. Figured someone was off-grid longer than usual." Hank was in his late 50s, tall with a slight hunch in his shoulders that spoke more of fatigue than age. His beard was iron gray and neatly trimmed, and his eyes, a weathered green, had the slow, observant calm of someone who'd watched more wildfires than weddings. His voice was low, not condescending, but measured. Like every word was a tool, chosen carefully. "I was just leaving," Harper said, brushing soil from her knees. "There was a Mustang caught in one of these." She motioned toward the trap. "I freed him." Hank stepped forward and studied the mangled metal. "Illegal. Not the first one I've seen this year. Damn poachers think the BLM's too stretched to patrol." Harper exhaled, grateful for the confirmation. He was hurt. "Not too deep, I think, but if infection sets in." "You did right," Hank interrupted. "Not a lot of folks would have done what you did. Some would have just taken the photo and walked on." She didn't respond, just nodded. There was a weight to this moment, and she didn't want to shatter it with small talk. "Do you live around here?" she finally asked. "Cabin up by Bitterroot Bluff, half ranger, half ghost." Hank said with a dry grin. "Don't get many visitors unless the forest's on fire, or the town's out of beer." Harper gave a faint smile. The tension between them was easing, two solitary creatures recognizing something shared. Hank crouched down and pulled a small notebook from his vest. "Mind if I jot this location down? I'll file it to the station, make sure we sweep this area." She nodded and watched as he scribbled coordinates in tight, neat handwriting. When he stood again, he looked at her with quiet appraisal. "You got a name?" "Harper Quinn." "Ah, I've read your byline in that wildlife journal. You're the one who shot that winter elk series up in the Flathead." She blinked in surprise. "That was years ago." "Still sticks with me," Hank said simply. "You've got an eye, not just for light, but for the soul of a thing." The compliment struck deeper than expected. Maybe because it was honest. Maybe because it was the first kind thing said to her in weeks. As Hank turned to leave, he paused and added, "You see that Mustang again, keep an eye out. If he makes it, he'll remember." They always do. Harper watched him disappear into the trees before gathering her things and heading back to her Jeep. Her legs ached, her boots were soaked, but her mind raced faster than her pulse. That night, as the wind howled outside her cabin and the pine trees creaked like the ribs of giants, Harper couldn't sleep. She kept replaying the look in the horse's eyes, that strange, intelligent sorrow that felt older than the trees. By morning, she was back at her desk, uploading the photos of the trap, filing a report to the Bureau of Land Management, and adding a note about the injured Mustang's direction. She attached GPS data, mapped the coordinates, and submitted the report anonymously. But even after all that, she found herself staring at her screen long after it went black. She didn't just want to let it go, so she gave him a name, Ash. Not just for the color of his coat, but for the way he seemed burned by something unseen, scarred but not consumed. A creature of smoke and memory. Over the next few days, Harper began returning to the trail where she'd first found Ash. Not to intervene, just to watch. She'd bring her camera, but never raise it. Instead, she sat among the trees, waiting. On the third evening, just as the sun sank behind the fir line and gold spilled across the mossy forest floor, she saw him. Ash stood between the trunks, partially hidden, his injured legs still favoring the ground but no longer trembling. He watched her, didn't move, didn't run. And then he dipped his head once, just a little, recognition, connection. Harper felt her chest swell with something she didn't have a name for yet. Maybe someday she would. The chill of mid-November had settled over Missoula like a patient frost, clinging to pine needles and blanketing the ground with the season's quiet resolve. Harper Quinn's cabin, tucked at the edge of Bitterroot's woodlands, was wrapped in solitude, its windows aglow with the soft amber of morning light. Inside, the kettle had just begun to whistle when Harper heard it. Faint at first, almost swallowed by the wind. A whinny, not a startled one, not pain, but low, throaty, familiar. She froze, coffee mug halfway to her lips. The sound came again, clearer now. Heart thudding, Harper crossed the room and flung open the front door, stepping barefoot onto the chilled porch. There he was. Ash, the slate-gray Mustang she had freed from the rusted trap a month ago, stood a dozen yards from her porch. His mane, now less matted, danced in the cold breeze, and the wounded leg, though still slightly favoring the ground, held weight. But he wasn't alone. Beside him stood a mare, bay-colored with a blaze of white between her eyes and an elegance that was as wary as it was regal. And beside her, smaller, legs like willow branches trembling in the cold, a foal. Pale brown, no older than a few months, with bright, darting eyes and a thick, fuzzy coat. Harper didn't move. Neither did they. Then Ash took one slow step forward, then another, before lowering his head deliberately in her direction. The gesture was unmistakable. Submission, respect, memory. Her breath hitched in her chest. She couldn't explain it, not scientifically, not even emotionally. She only knew that something sacred had returned to her. Over the next several weeks, Ash began to return regularly, sometimes alone, sometimes with the mare and foal, whom Harper named Juniper and Sprig. Ash kept his distance, always, but his behavior bordered on ritual. He would approach the same spot on the west edge of her property, graze, patrol, and then vanish back into the trees before dusk. Harper found herself watching for him each morning, but she wasn't the only one who noticed. On a quiet Tuesday, while Harper was hauling a bale of hay to the shed, a routine left over from her brief attempt at raising chickens, she heard the crunch of gravel at the end of her long, winding drive. A battered blue pickup rolled into view, its rusted hood rattling like a metal prayer. The door opened, and out stepped a woman, sharp-eyed and wrapped in a scarf the color of cinnamon bark. "Morning," the woman called, stepping into view with a reporter's confidence. "Name's Sadie Bell. I'm with the Missoula Gazette." Sadie was in her late 30s, with shoulder-length black hair pulled into a messy bun, freckles across her nose, and a camera slung across one shoulder like an extra limb. Her jeans were scuffed, her boots worn, and her smile disarmingly casual. "I heard from a local BLM contact that someone's been reporting trap sites up here. Thought I'd do a little digging. Mind if I ask a few questions?" Harper tightened her grip on the bail. "This isn't a story." "Not yet," Sadie said, lifting her camera but not aiming it. "But the folks in town are talking. Something about a ghost Mustang showing up out of nowhere, guarding a cabin, showing gratitude." Harper said nothing. Ash hadn't appeared yet that day, but she didn't like the idea of strangers waiting for him. "I don't want to cause trouble," Sadie added, her tone softening. "But if something real is happening, something unusual between a wild animal and a person, it's worth documenting. Not for clickbait, for understanding." Harper studied her a moment longer, then nodded toward the edge of the field. "You can wait there. No cameras unless I say." "Deal," Sadie agreed, setting her bag gently by the fence post. That evening, as the sun dipped low and cast long violet shadows across the tree line, Ash appeared, alone this time. His presence seemed to quiet the air around him. Sadie stood still, breath caught, fingers away from the shutter. Ash didn't come close, but he stopped at the edge of the trees and stared at Harper for a long time. Then, again, lowered his head. Sadie exhaled slowly, whispering, "That's not instinct." Harper said nothing. She didn't have to. Later that night, over tea, the two women talked by the fireplace. Sadie shared that she grew up near Billings, had been writing nature columns for 12 years, and had once been attacked by a dog as a child, an event that left her both fascinated and afraid of animal behavior. "I've covered wolves, grizzlies, even bison migration," she said, staring into the flames. "But I've never seen a horse do what I saw today. Not wild, not deliberate like that." Harper sipped her tea. "He's not mine." "No," Sadie replied, "but you're his." The next morning, Harper walked the property perimeter with Ash in the distance. She left a few slices of apple and half a carrot near the tree line, not too close to the house. When she returned in the afternoon, they were gone. That evening, Juniper and Sprig came too. Sprig trotted like a wild breeze, all legs and curiosity, nibbling at bark and occasionally darting behind his mother's legs. Juniper kept to herself, rarely looking toward Harper. But Ash, he stood between them and the cabin, a guardian. The first true snow of winter had blanketed the Montana wilderness with a silence so complete it made sound itself seem rude. At Harper Quinn's cabin, the world looked dipped in powdered glass. Pine branches bent under the weight of frozen white. The air crackled with cold. Inside the cabin, Harper stirred a pot of venison stew, the scent mingling with pine smoke curling up the chimney. She had just returned from a short trip to Missoula to deliver a batch of printed wildlife photos to a local gallery. Her hands were numb despite gloves, her cheeks wind-kissed and pink. The sun had already dipped below the treetops, casting long, wolfish shadows over her property. As she rounded bend toward her driveway, she felt it, a wrong miss. The front gate was ajar. The side window on her porch glinted with something sharp and unnatural. When she pulled into her gravel path and stepped out of her Jeep, heart thudding, she saw them. Two men in dark flannel coats were rifling through a storage bin beneath her porch, one holding what looked like her trail camera. The other had his hand inside a crate labeled medical supplies, animal use. Neither looked up at first. Then one did. He was stocky, with a bearded jaw and hollow cheeks. Early 40s maybe, with a chapped face and restless eyes. His name would later be confirmed as Donnie Price, a former trapper banned from BLM lands for repeat violations. His companion, Kyle Grover, was younger, tall, wiry, with a twitchy, nervous energy, his eyes darting from window to woodline. Harper backed toward her vehicle, hands trembling, fumbling for her phone, but there was no signal, no time. The men had noticed her. "You alone out here, miss?" Donnie's voice rang out, sly and cutting. "Looks like you got some fancy gear for tracking." Kyle stepped forward, grinning. "You the one been reporting those traps? That was a real pain." "I'm calling the sheriff," Harper snapped, raising the phone anyway. But before anyone could move, before she could retreat or they could advance, a sound split the air like a whip crack. A wail. A wild, furious whinny that rolled out from the edge of the forest, echoed off the snowy hills, and froze the intruders where they stood. Ash burst from the tree line like a silver phantom, his hooves barely seeming to touch the frozen earth. He was larger than Harper remembered him. Winter muscle thickened his frame, and his breath poured from flared nostrils and steam. He galloped straight for the porch, not at Harper, but at the intruders. Donnie swore aloud. Kyle stumbled back into the side railing. Ash reared before them, his forelegs cutting the air, mane flying like shredded silk, eyes blazing. He didn't strike, didn't charge, but the message was unmistakable. Leave. The men bolted. One dropped a flashlight in the snow. The other slipped, cursing, as they scrambled to their beat-up Ford Ranger and roared off down the trail, tires fishtailing on the ice-packed gravel. Ash remained. He circled the property once, ears alert, tail flicking high. Then he returned to stand beside Harper's porch, still heaving with adrenaline but composed, as if nothing unusual had happened. Harper stared at him, stunned, until her knees gave out and she sat right there in the snow. It took the sheriff almost an hour to arrive, along with a deputy. Sheriff Louise Braddock was a stocky woman in her 50s, with silver-streaked red hair, a wide jaw, and the blunt efficiency of someone who'd seen too much and didn't romanticize a thing. She wore a dark brown jacket with a cracked leather badge sewn into the chest and walked with a slight limp, remnants of a car chase gone wrong. Her deputy, Cameron Tate, was young, bookish, and wide-eyed, fresh out of training. He mostly listened, scribbled notes, and glanced nervously at Ash, who had returned to the edge of the woods but remained visible. "Let me get this straight," Braddock said, arms crossed, boots crunching over the driveway. "You didn't sick the horse on them?" "I didn't even know he was near," Harper replied, still holding the blanket wrapped around her shoulders. "He acted on his own." "Sure did," the sheriff murmured, motioning to the porch camera. "You mind if we pull that footage?" Harper nodded and handed over the SD card. Later that night, Braddock would call back, saying, "I've seen horses buck off riders, kick down fences, but this looked like instinct mixed with intent." Harper didn't sleep. She stayed up reviewing the footage herself. The video showed Ash charging the moment Harper froze, rearing between her and the men. It captured every second of his display, and when she posted a short clip, careful to obscure her location, it went viral. The next day, she had over 40 emails, reporters, scientists, wildlife photographers, horse behaviorists. The Missoula Gazette ran a front-page story, "Ghost Stallion Guards Woman's Home, Mustang or Guardian." Sadie Bell's byline sat at the top, balanced and restrained, filled with thoughtful quotes and no exaggerations. One of those emails came from Dr. Marianne Kepler, a behavioral ecologist from UC Davis. In her mid-60s, tall and thin with silver blonde hair, always in a braided bun, Dr. Kepler was known for her work on emotional intelligence in prey animals. She wrote, "I've studied equine cognition for over 30 years, and I've never documented a wild horse acting this deliberately in defense of a human. I'd like to observe Ash, non-invasively, if you'll permit it." Harper agreed, on one condition: no touching, no tagging, no interference. Kepler arrived a week later, bringing high-powered lenses, field notebooks, and a demeanor both scientific and deeply respectful. She didn't ask to get close. She sat in the snow for hours, just watching. "I think you've been accepted into his herd," Kepler said on the second day. "This isn't protection out of training, it's chosen loyalty." Harper looked toward the trees. Ash was barely visible, just a silhouette, watching, waiting. Spring had come late to Missoula. The mountains still wore their white crowns, and the trees along the Bitterroot foothills unfurled their leaves like cautious hands. Harper Quinn had spent the last few months immersed in writing, sorting photos, answering interview requests she often ignored. The footage of Ash protecting her had sparked a national conversation, but she shied away from the spotlight. She didn't want to turn something sacred into spectacle. So when she was invited to photograph a new herd of elk in the high ridges of Kootenai National Forest, she accepted gladly. It was a chance to get away, to recalibrate. She loaded up her Jeep with gear, camera lenses, first aid kit, dehydrated meals, and made her way along the old logging roads deep into the wilderness. The first day was peaceful. She camped by a glacial stream, captured a bull elk stepping through fog, and journaled by firelight. But the next morning, a dense storm rolled in, unexpected, fast-moving, and merciless. Wind howled between the peaks. Her GPS tracker glitched, blinking red, then black. Her phone was no better. She tried to backtrack, but mist swallowed the path, and every direction began to look the same. By late afternoon, the wind had dropped, but the cold intensified. The sun vanished behind cloud banks. Harper's compass spun uselessly as she stumbled into a clearing, ankle deep in melting snowmelt, hands trembling. When night fell, it came hard. She pulled on her headlamp and wrapped herself tighter in her parka, crouching beside a boulder to conserve heat. Her thoughts circled panic like vultures: hypothermia, isolation, exposure. She had told no one where she was going. Even Dr. Kepler had only been given general coordinates for a different day. Then it happened. A sound cut the silence. Not the wind, not a branch breaking. A whinny, low, sharp, rising through the still air like a lighthouse beam in darkness. She held her breath. Another cry, closer this time. Harper stood, swept the beam of her headlamp toward the forest's edge, and there, through the blur of mist and branches, was Ash. He stood on a low ridge, just above her camp, head high, mane rippling in the wind. His coat shimmered silver beneath the beam, but his eyes, they were fixed on hers. Then he stomped once, turned and trotted down a narrow game trail, pausing, looking back. Harper didn't hesitate. She grabbed her pack, secured her camera, and followed. What followed was a journey of steady descent, over mossy rock, through thick alder, across shallow creeks. Ash moved carefully, never too far ahead. When she slowed, he paused. When she stumbled, he circled back. It took over an hour, but eventually the trees parted and the curve of a gravel road revealed itself through the moonlight haze. Harper dropped to her knees, dizzy with relief. Ash stood nearby, watching. Then, without ceremony, he turned and disappeared into the forest once again. She made it to town by dawn. Her hands were frostbitten at the tips. Her GPS confirmed she had been over 7 miles from any known trail. The ranger who found her muttered, "You're lucky to be alive." Harper didn't argue, but she knew it hadn't been luck. Dr. Kepler later reviewed the GPS data with quiet reverence. "We may have to rethink how we define spatial memory in Mustangs," she said, "or how we define loyalty." A year passed. Spring came again. Harper spent the anniversary of that first day, the day she found Ash in the trap, back in the same clearing. She didn't bring gear. She wasn't there to document. She brought no offerings, just herself. Just memory. The light was gold, soft, sifting through pine needles when she heard it, hoofbeats. She turned slowly. Ash stood in the exact place she had found him, leg now fully healed, body gleaming in spring coat. But he wasn't alone. Behind him stood Juniper. Sprig, now almost fully grown, had the long limbs of a young stallion and the playfulness of a pup. But there were others too, dozens. From between the trees, scattered through the field, emerged horses Harper had never seen. Mares with wind-tangled manes, foals no older than weeks, stalwart stallions whose scars told stories longer than names. A great circle formed slowly, quietly, around the place of Ash's rebirth. Then he stepped forward. He bowed. Low and deliberate, and one by one the others followed. It was not rehearsed, it was not trained, it was reverence. Harper's tears blurred the sight. She didn't move, didn't breathe, just let it pass through her. In that moment she understood this was not her miracle alone. This was a bridge between wildness and witness, pain and peace, silence and trust. And Ash had become its keeper. Sometimes the wildest creatures are the ones who teach us the deepest truths about loyalty, memory, and silent acts of grace. Ash was never tamed, he was never owned, but he chose to protect, to return, and to remember. And in that choice, he reminded us of something we often forget in our busy, divided world, that trust must be earned, respect must be mutual, and real connection needs no words. In our daily lives, we pass by people, moments, even animals without truly seeing them. But what if we paused? What if we listened closer? To the quiet needs, the invisible wounds, the stories written in silence. Maybe then, like Harper, we'd discover that even the most unlikely bond can change everything. If this story touched you, help us keep sharing moments that matter. Leave a comment with your thoughts or share a time you felt connected to an animal or the wild. And if you believe in stories that heal, inspire, and unite, subscribe to our channel and share this video with someone who needs it. Every share helps us continue telling stories that speak without shouting.